Today we're going to be discussing something every business owner should consider, building their business valuation. Today I'm joined by Max Fryer, President and CEO of Calder Capital. They're located right here in Grand Rapids and they deal a lot with mergers and acquisitions. Max, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to talk about 5 key items that every business owner should consider when selling. The first, customer diversity. You want to touch on that point, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before we start, I just want to say that a lot of these things come down to trust and risk. So when you talk about customer diversity, that really comes down to risk. If your business has 1 or 2 customers that make up 80% of sales, buyers are going to find that as risky. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't want owners to think they can't sell if they have high customer concentration. It just usually means that fewer buyers will be interested, and usually the deal structure will be affected such that the owner might be asked to finance a significant portion of the deal.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about customer relationships. I mean, talk about kind of recurring revenue and relationships in that regard and how that looks.
Yeah, of course. So a good example would be to look at like sale multiples for software businesses versus construction businesses, right? Mm-hmm. A software business often has a lot of recurring revenue and therefore oftentimes has a higher valuation because buyers trust that revenue is going to continue. Mm-hmm. In a construction business, oftentimes they're as good as their last building or their last renovation project, so buyers are more kind of keen on retaining those relationships because they know there isn't recurring revenue there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and another thing that we hear a lot of business owners say is, I'm so busy I can't take a vacation, or if I were to walk away, I don't know what would happen with the company. Mm-hmm. Can you just in a few words, just describe the dangers or the potential setbacks or drawbacks to that mentality of not having good people around you to allow you to take that time away?
I mean, that's going to come back to risk, right? Mm-hmm. If the owner, a lot of times owners start businesses and they love being like the guy, right? Like, yeah, all the customers are with me and all the employees report to me. Well, that's risky to a buyer, right? A buyer mm-hmm. will look at that and say, well, if this business is all just about the owner, mm-hmm. then that's a lot of risk when I take it over, right? So
when you buy a company, you don't buy the owner. You buy the company in spite of them sometimes.
I buy the owner for a little bit of a transition period, but mm-hmm. They're selling because they want to go, right? Often
take that vacation.
They want to take that vacation finally for the first time in 30 years. So
yeah,
I think the last point on that would be we see a lot of owners struggle to make the investment forward in hiring really good people, because sometimes you have to overpay for good people. I mean, mm-hmm. I guess you have to pay more than you might want to for that right person, and that can hurt an owner because that hurts their pockets. But long term, that's setting the business up with a strong foundation, and it will raise the value.
Yeah, another thing we look at is just record keeping, right? A lot of owners get busy, mm-hmm. and sometimes they get a little bit lazy on their record keeping. Mm-hmm. Can you just touch on how important that is and what that looks like from a valuation standpoint?
Sure, of course. So that comes down to trust. Mm-hmm. If a buyer looks at your financials and the balance sheet doesn't balance, and there's a bunch of strange entries in the P&L that don't make any sense, or the owner can't explain what certain line items are, it just causes the buyer to lose trust in the accuracy of what they're seeing, right? And if they don't trust the financials, they will oftentimes look at something that they'll go look for a business where they can trust the financials. So, mm-hmm. As you're preparing to sell, making sure you have a good CPA, making sure you have reviewed financial statements, things like that can be very critical to building mm-hmm. trust with buyers.
Well, and if you take that one step further, I think it actually leads perfectly into the last point, which is profitability. Mm-hmm. Clean books produce accurate records, but also can help you find trends and maybe increase profitability. Can you touch on that for a quick second? Yeah,
I think there's the 2 key things here, and this is critical. Strong profits are what drive valuation. Mm-hmm. 99% of businesses trade on a fair market multiple of earnings, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't have earnings, you oftentimes don't have value, right? So focusing on increasing those earnings is going to really increase your business's value. And the second point there is just simply, we see oftentimes owners using the business as their personal piggy bank. So they're running all their personal expenses, their vacations, their home renovations, things that frankly they shouldn't be running through the business, but they do. I recommend that those things stop a couple of years before mm-hmm. they sell the business.
Well, and you mentioned a couple of years. Is that only applicable to profitability, or when would you start kind of all of these practice points?
I mean, you want to start all these as soon as you can,
Right.
But I would say definitely in the 2 to 3 years before you want to sell the business, focusing on all of these things gives you time to, I mean, you cannot affect these things in 3 to 6 months oftentimes. I mean, you might be able to affect your record keeping, but you can't affect, hiring and training good people. You can't really affect customer diversity. You can't affect profitability with only 3 months of time.
Yeah.
So I would say 3 years.
Yeah. Well, Max, thanks for taking the time to sit down with us today. And thanks for joining us today. Let's keep moving forward together.